Hi Ved, what's up? How have you been?
Hi. Good, bro. It's been a good week, still in memory of a good birthday. but
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's a pretty significant week for other reasons as well. I just
Yes.
noticed we're talking on the 25th. So as usual, like the old stories and like the pictures of blank front pages from the emergency days come up.
Mm-hmm.
So you start reading some article which you miss each year. There's something which you've never heard of before about the thing. And
Exactly.
yeah,
I mean, how do you sort of prevent the barrage of articles and the barrage of commentaries that take place in light of the emergency? So, for those of you who perhaps aren't keeping track of the calendar, and it's easy to lose track of the calendar, honestly, in lockdown. It's been 45 years since the emergency was imposed by Indira Gandhi's government in 1975, and that, at least officially, is the darkest phase in India's democratic history. The emergency went on for close to 2 years before Indira Gandhi called elections, in a very surprising move, in fact, and of course, she would go on to lose power. I have heard a lot of people saying, Ved, that today we are living in the midst of an undeclared emergency. I've been looking at a few articles online that talk about how today's situation is actually worse than what happened in 75. Today, under Modi, if you look at the way institutions have been co-opted, the way freedom of speech has been curbed, the way right-wing ideology is flouting all across India's democratic corridors. Do you actually think that we are in a worse position now than we were in
Oh,
75?
definitely not. Definitely not. And I mean, I don't want to sound right wing apologist or right wing, which is very easy to. It's very easy to sound as if you're a Modi defender these days, right? But I want to like put things into perspective, right? The emergency was the darkest like time in independent India's history. It's absolutely like you must have an abysmal idea of what happened in the emergency and an abysmal idea of what's happening today to compare the two, right? I think Indira Gandhi, as a politician, also was vastly different in her policies and her approach to just politics from Modi. I think, especially like just the you mentioned co-opting of institutions, right? I think the manipulation of law or the manipulation of the mandates of institutions is definitely happening. The usage of like very like otherwise like institutions with otherwise high integrity to for like like hidden causes like ulterior motives is definitely happening. But the emergency was something different. You were throwing everyone left, right, and center into jail. You removed Parliament's power for 21 months, right? And she ruled like a dictator. Like we
Mhm.
don't have a Jayaprakash Narayan. Like unless you have that level of scourge across the country with like a vasectomy drive to control population, like things which only you imagine in Kim Jong Un's regime today, right? I don't think we can liken ourselves to the emergency.
Mhm. Yes, and I think in many ways it's a false equivalence when people start talking about Modi's supposedly authoritarian use of his mandate to take over certain institutional frameworks of Indian democracy. I think it's a false equivalence with Indira Gandhi, because what Indira Gandhi did was outright dictatorial. What Modi is doing is more in the lines of this elected autocrat model that has sprouted across the world, especially in populist regimes. So, be it in America, be it in the UK, be it perhaps more severely in places like Israel. But what I want to steer this discussion towards is actually a comparison and a contrast between Indira and Modi, because I find both of these personalities very fascinating. I think they are two of the most, I wouldn't use the word popular, but most impressionable prime ministers in Indian history after Jawaharlal Nehru. And unlike Nehru, I think both of them have a lot of similarities in terms of the personality, in terms of the cult of personality around their politics. So, I mean, what strikes me as being very disparate, first and foremost, between Modi and Indira is how they come from very different backgrounds. How do you think their backgrounds has influenced the kind of politics they have managed to offer as prime ministers?
So, firstly, I don't think there are many similarities, right? Where they are both leaders who are very strong-willed, who are very strong-willed, and rule with some amount of autocracy and the centralized power within their working. But I think it stops literally there, and there's so much more to the profile of a leader and to a politician, and to compare them is I think it's just because we have fairly more diffident people on the political landscape over the years, right? So it's not their fault they're being compared. But on that question, I think Indira Gandhi coming from a far more erudite background where her drawing room included like people of from literature, people from around the world, like international leaders, and the her upbringing was corely political, and the thoughts she had, the heavy tilt towards socialism, was all influenced, like, because a large part was influenced because she grew up as the first daughter of India, right? And
Hmm.
that plays a big role in even in the myopic way in which she went about her politics and administration later on. And so I think her background is like fairly different. Even the struggles she is known to have gone through are fairly different from the very commoner struggles which Modi has seen, right? And Modi is far more a self-made man. Not that I'm trying to praise him there, but his trajectory is very different. The way, the enlightenment process he went through when he read up on Swami Vivekananda, left home and went off into the Himalayas. His trajectory is different. He's come up from bureaucracy into politics. You only told me a few days back, right, that he wasn't even chief. He wasn't even elected. He didn't fight his first election before he became Gujarat's chief minister, right? So
Yes, yes.
he's a
And a small
grassroots person.
anecdote on that. I mean, the kind of
Uh,
real politic that the people like Narendra Modi are used to. So he actually sent a memo to several news media houses against Keshubhai Patel, who was then the chief ministerial candidate for Gujarat, basically to try and get some sort of flack against him going, so that people in the BJP would consider Modi over Keshubhai Patel. So this is a man that wouldn't hesitate going against his own party members. So that's the kind of real politic that Modi has come from. And I think once you mention background, it's also very important to acknowledge that unlike Indira Gandhi, Narendra Modi was never really the chosen one. I mean, even with Indira, perhaps you could argue that she wasn't the chosen one per se, but I think after, let's say, the turn of the 1960s, Indira started becoming this hostess kind of a figure where she would accompany Nehru and she would play second fiddle to Nehru in meeting leaders, in organizing meetings, and she was seen as this hostess of the Congress. And there was this feeling that she would one day succeed Nehru. What I think is important is what Indira did after she became prime minister. So there was this idea that she would be a mouthpiece for the senior leaders of the Congress. In fact, they even gave her an epithet, which is the Gungi Guria. But then the Gungi Guria suddenly became very provocative and very vociferous once she became prime minister, and she took everything in her charge, which of course led to the splitting of the Congress in '69. And then Congress essentially became an Indira bastion. You compare that to Modi, and he is somebody, as you rightly said, who's gone through all those different hierarchies, risen through the different strata of what is essentially a very intricate system of politics that the RSS and then the BJP eventually has. Modi played a very important part in organizing Advani's Rath Yatra in '92, and in many ways he was seen as this great event manager, right? So, but people never thought he would be prime minister. Like even in 2004, when the UPA started its first term, I don't think a lot of people would have believed that if you told them in 10 years' time Narendra
they
Modi
did,
would be prime minister and
they
by
did,
such a huge mandate.
they, they did. But you know what? I think that's literally where I draw the comparison to Modi's favor over Indira's. Is that he thought he would be prime minister, right? And that's literally something you see as a trend in Congress. The same thing they did when Nehru died, Lal Bahadur Shastri somehow wasn't good enough for the Congress very soon. And when Rajiv Gandhi died and they tried to protect his legacy by bringing in Sonia Gandhi, assuming that their female infusion into their CWC would be some kind of a very someone who's valuable for the others, right? They
Mm-hmm.
have a legacy of reluctant, reticent people leading the charge and who somehow go in and like spoil things at the helm, right? Or assume too much power or too little responsibility. And compare that to someone who's literally risen through the ranks, and at least he thought he would be prime minister. And these guys didn't even have these aims unless the family thrusted upon them, right? But so interesting thing you mentioned about the hostess point, right? Where I remember she decorated, I think, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's room, right, when she was
Yes,
going to
yes.
meet him. And that meeting didn't turn out well, but she literally went around Delhi picking up artifacts and carpets from different VIP homes in Lutyens and putting it into the place where he was going to live. So I think there was a very funny personality side of the personality to Indira, but I want to
Mhm.
draw it more towards the economic front, right? I think
Yeah.
the kind of we can make a very high contrast between the economic policies of Indira and the economic policies of Modi, right? I think
Mhm.
Indira had a fairly less consultative or visionary economic policy. Look at the way she just reversed, like she went full guns blazing into socialism, even more than Nehru Malanobis model said, right?
Mm,
She
mm,
literally debased the socialist base of the Nehru Malanobis model. There was a reason they didn't go fully Soviet, and they kept it to what the economists told them in 47. And she nationalized. I think her downfall began from 74 when she nationalized the wholesale for wheat. They went on to banks, went on to coal mines. She really she forgot that the winds of change were moving towards privatization across the world, right? right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and her consultations with people who were largely socialist in nature, and she misread that the country wanted the preamble to read socialist, the word socialist within that. So I think she did make these mistakes and didn't have a policy that really reflected those times. Whereas Modi at least has far more consultation with the industry. He's more open, and of course, the simple binary is socialism versus full on, full throttle capitalism. He's even going to liberalize the railways.
Mm-hmm. But I think when you mentioned that Modi is apparently more consultative, I mean, that might happen to a certain extent with the industry, but even that, it happens with a businessman and industrialist that he's on very good terms with, so the likes of Adani and those who rose to great prominence during his chief ministership at Gujarat. But what I find startling about Modi is his ability to take decisions that shake up the system without any
Mhm.
consultation with the correspondent institution. So the classic case being demonetization, when there was absolutely no consultation whatsoever with the Reserve Bank of India. And prior to that, he did it in what, November 2016, right? Prior to that, they had been mooting the idea of something similar, and Raghuram Rajan, who was then the governor, had strongly advised the government against taking such a measure. But Modi just suddenly decided that he was going to go ahead and demonetize the 500 and the 1,000 rupee notes. Many people actually see that as not an economic measure, but as a measure to cripple the other party's finances ahead of the UP elections. So a lot of people thought that the economic argument, the idea of black money, was essentially a smokescreen that was used by the BJP. But whatever, I think the main idea about Modi and the main difference I see in between the policies of Indira and Modi is that Indira's policies are fairly reactionary, and I think in many ways they are reactionary not just towards the greater trends that were taking place across Asia and across the world, but also reactionary towards the old Congress guard. It seemed for a large part of her political career, and I would say till the imposition of the emergency, so essentially the first half of her prime ministership, it seemed that everything she did was in an attempt to rebut what the old Congress guard thought she could not do or thought
Ah,
wasn't the right thing to do. Whereas with Modi, it's of course part of a larger vision that stems in many ways from the Gujarat model, and in terms of policy making, of course, in terms of political realm, it stems from the Hindutva legacy.
no, so of course, you're correct in terms of how her policies were largely reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's an interesting parallel to draw even in the larger front of how the strong measures of both these leaders play, right? With Article 370 and all these things which they've done, which literally stems from their unprovocated, unprovocated manifesto, right? It's completely of their own accord. Modi's policies are largely actionary, regardless of whether it's on what front, economic or social. Indra's was reactionary even to her opposition and not just to the Congress guard, right? When you spoke about Modi and like how he's not consultative, draw another comparison there, right? In 1963, there was a Kamdar report given to Nehru, and that literally reversed the fortunes of an otherwise on the track to being crippled Congress that time, right? Where the Kamdar was the I think the chief minister of Madras, right? And he suggested that all the top Congress brass, 4, 5 chief ministers, the
Kamraj, you
entire
mean the
cabinet,
Kamraj plan?
yeah,
Yeah.
Kamraj,
Yes.
that they resign from their posts and
Mm-hmm.
let younger leadership take up, and they go back to the constituencies, work on the grassroots with the people, right?
Yes.
Something which Rahul Gandhi should do right now. But
Mm.
that literally like compare the way in which Indira completely ignored stuff like she never made moves which were in line with what the party wanted or send these old people back to ground zero, right? Like
Mm.
Modi does. Modi makes sure that his party people are, even if it's prachar and it's propaganda to a large level, right? At least he makes sure that electorally he's not being defeated on that front, which Indra never did. Like her politics was a very funnily myopic politics because she just removed everyone in one sweep. And look at the amount of
Mm.
support she lost after that. I don't
Yes.
think even the split into Congress I, her faction was necessarily an reactionary move. She's been reactionary throughout. In fact, the only thing I think she's done which is actionary is her walking like going into Belchi after the Dalit massacre on elephant back.
Mm.
Right, that's where she started a revival.
Yes, but I think also what we need to realize is that we're looking at two different political systems and two different political cultures in which both these leaders were operating. Today, the BJP is part of an electoral juggernaut with Modi at the tip of it, with Modi being the face of the brand, as it were. It actually runs like a corporation, the BJP. If you look at how centralized it is, if you look at how the micromanagement of the organization is absolutely impeccable in terms of the way they disseminate messages on WhatsApp groups to the way party cadres work at the grassroots level. Of course, back in the day, there was no such organization among the Congress, and certainly not among Indira's wing. So Indira's politics was more about the politics of charisma, about creating certain connections with the people that priorly hadn't existed. So Nehru, of course, was a very popular leader, but I don't think he had that direct mass appeal that Indira cultivated. I mean, you could say that in the end it wasn't very effectual, but she did have it, right? I mean, when she launched the Garibi Hatao campaign, when uh, people were like Indira ko hatao, and then she turned it into Garibi ko hatao, and then
Uh,
people started, all these slogans that India is Indira, Indira is in India. So that
uh,
populist appeal, I think, is something that largely preserves her legacy. But you're
mm,
right, in terms of policy making, perhaps there wasn't any impressive achievement. But I will give credit to her for how she handled the 74 situation. I think that was a pivotal moment for India, not just in terms of the geopolitical scenario, but also in terms of what it stood for as a country. And of course, look, with respect to military achievements, there is only so much credit that can be given to an elected head of state. But
uh,
at the same time, what I felt was very impressive from Indira's point of view was how she did not succumb to American pressure, especially American pressure that was being led by Henry Kissinger, who was then, I believe, the security advisor or secretary of state, either of those portfolios. So she did not succumb to American pressure, and nor did she openly quote the Soviet Union. So I felt that was a very important step in India's democratic history where she kind of stood up to the imperial forces.
yeah, in fact, there was a journalist who went and asked Indira Gandhi, "Ma'am, which way do you lean? Which way does India tilt? Does it tilt towards the Soviets or towards America?" And she said,
Mhm.
"No, yeah, India does not tilt; it stands upright." Right? And it
Yes.
was a yeah, but even there, I mean, I think Indira Gandhi. So in general, I think a golden rule in politics is that the politics of the present is a reaction to the inefficiencies of the past, right? And
Mm.
the impeccability of the corporate machine that the BJP RSS combined is largely because of the absolute, like the abject failure to be that by the Manmohan Singh government, and the ways in which and where we can make a contrast between Modi and how he goes on a single trajectory, right? I don't think since 2014 the opposition has got a word in edgeways. And Indira and the frequency of her reversals. If you look at after she came in after Morarji Desai, she just reversed and she brought down inflation. She focused on somewhere the more private sector type functioning and efficiencies of the state enterprises. She went
Mm.
slightly less full throttle on the socialism aspect, right? And she reversed her policy. She went down back to ground zero. Belchi is an example.
She also
So,
started promoting her own version of soft Hindutva, going out to temples and being seen doing religious things which previously she would not be seen doing.
hmm, exactly. So these reversals are not things which Modi, as of now, has characterized into his profile as a prime minister. So I
Mm.
think there he is far more in touch with what he wants. He's more in touch, or at least he's able to propagate what he wants and make people agree, or make it seem as if people agree. And he's going on his trajectory unhindered since he started. And Indira didn't have that, right? She had too many problems on her way because, as is typical of the Congress, she had too many consultants, not all of whom were on her side.
Mhm.
Right? I think I forget the name of her cabinet secretary, like someone who was very close to her, right? Her Amit Shah, but
PN Haskar, yes, yes.
P.N. Husker, right?
Not quite her
So
Amit Shah, but I guess you can call him her confidant. But yeah, he
uh,
was very crucial. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because what I also wanted to talk about is how these sort of right hand men, or whatever you want to call them, second in command, how they differ with respect to Indira Gandhi and Narendra Modi. Of course, with Indira, it was PN Haskar, who was in some ways effectively her PA. And it's very interesting because it was only after that PN Haskar was kind of sidelined within her coterie that she started doing these ridiculous things, whether it be the imposition of the emergency or the whole sterilization drive that was led by Sanjay Gandhi. As long as PN Haskar was there dictating matters for her, she led a fairly balanced prime ministership. But I think
exactly.
to compare that with Amit Shah would be fair and unfair on two
Mhm.
separate levels. One is, of course, Amit Shah is a political strategist. PN Haskar wasn't really a political strategist. And I think the other thing to consider is Indira and PN Haskar had this sort of deferential relationship, which I don't think applies so much to Modi and Amit Shah. I think with Modi and Amit Shah, it's almost like a match of convenience. They both obviously have a certain degree of respect for each other, but they also realize that they are not like some incredible soulmates that are at the top of the system. And in many ways, I think in certain aspects of the Indian media, it's kind of portrayed that way, that Modi and Shah are like two best
Who,
friends and like
yeah,
Jay and Viru
that's
running the
definitely
Indian
not true.
democracy.
That
That
is
is not true.
definitely not.
Yes.
They didn't know each other before for a long time while both were into politics. And like they met in very different circumstances. There have also been fallouts, and there were times where it was very obvious that their relationship is not at in the best of times. And
Hmm.
like there were times when Modi was pretty willing to let Amit Shah go, and when Amit Shah wanted charge of more than just UP, when Modi became prime minister, he candidate in 2013, as the rumors said, he wasn't given more than just the charge of UP. So it's not like it's always, even though it's of convenience, it's not even been convenient to both of them at all points of time, to put it
Mhm.
that way. So it's very different from P.N. Haskar. But what I found interesting there is I didn't know so much about P.N. Haskar and Indra's relationship.
Mhm.
And I think it goes back to where the first question you threw at me, that her upbringing is of erudition, and it reeks of erudition and of a literary drawing room. It's literally like a Tagore who couldn't do much with the kind of drawing room he got, because it's funny how she literally, when she went independent, she couldn't do much and ended up taking decisions like the emergency and insecurity reflecting emergency.
Hmm.
But with a bureaucrat or with someone far more wise by her side, she could do better, which is not the case with Modi, right? With or without Amit Shah, he has taken. In fact, with Amit Shah, he's faced far more criticisms, not electorally but policy-wise.
Hmm.
But as Home Minister, Amit Shah has really like ruined his record a bit.
Hmm.
But without Amit Shah, he's still
Yeah.
taken a fair bit of good policy measures, even after Amit Shah was on the run. As after the fake investigation case in Gujarat, Modi was doing a terrific job, at least as it went down in history. So
So
yeah,
there's this word of
but
mouth story that
you
suggests
mentioned
when
Sanjay Gandhi, right? Which is like slight deviation, but that tells you so much about the Congress, that they are a bunch of reluctant politicians. Not that I have something particular against the Congress, but it's like the British royal family. The
Mhm.
Indira Gandhi is like Queen Victoria, and Edward the Seventh is like Sanjay Gandhi, who then of course Sanjay died, but Edward the Seventh abdicated, and they couldn't, and the real chosen one couldn't be there in power, and the throne went to reluctant Rajiv Gandhi, who tried his best to hold the legacy, and Elizabeth is Sonia Gandhi, who came in so reluctantly and never did much, but is continuing ad infinitum. And Charles is Rahul Gandhi, who like no one knows what's going to happen, but no one expects anything good to happen.
Yes, I
So
think
yeah,
I would use a
it
different
equally
analogy
fits
for
in.
yeah, I would use a different analogy for Rahul. Though I think I'd like to call him as having the reverse Midas touch, which basically means everything he touches turns into garbage. But I think, to be fair to Rahul as well, I think the problem for him is that he's come into an era of Indian politics where the Congress no longer has the infrastructure to be as relevant to the political machinery as the BJP is. So for Rahul to reform, he kind of has to start from scratch, which again he can't do because of the old guard, the hegemony that still dictates the Congress. So he's got his task cut out. But just one thing, one quick anecdote I wanted to mention about Amit Shah when you were talking about the fake encounter case. So, and this is just word of mouth, so like don't quote me on this. But apparently, when Amit Shah was in jail and he was being investigated, there were certain offers that were made to him in the sense that he was told that if he's going to provide any evidence against Narendra Modi, if he can provide some linkages showing that Modi was clearly complicit, then he would be let off. But Amit Shah refused to do that. And there is a certain theory, and again, I'm not saying that this is the correct theory or this is the genuine theory, but there is a theory that that is why Modi is at least accepting of Shah to a certain extent, that he's not of other political leaders in the BJP, because maybe Modi somewhere feels that he's indebted to Amit Shah for not implicating him. But I think whether this is true or not is something we can't prove, of course. But what is more important is that Amit Shah plays a very important foil to Narendra Modi, which Indira Gandhi did not have in her setup. So Amit Shah is the belligerent Hindutvavadi, if you want to call him that. He believes in the Hindu nation theory. He's going to go ahead and implement those policies, and which is why it was very significant that he's the one who actually spoke on the floor of the parliament about both when the Article 370 was abrogated, as well as when the CAA was brought in. It wasn't Modi. Modi wasn't even there in parliament
That's
during the
because he's home
CAA.
minister. He's got to
No,
raise the bill.
yeah, but what I see, I think we've seen in the past when all these measures have been brought in, it's not let's say beyond precedence to see a prime minister actually speak about these issues, even if it's the home minister who introduces the bill, right? But the fact that Modi was sat on the benches during 370 for the entirety of Amit Shah's address, and that he wasn't there at all when the CAA was passed, in a way, I think suggests that Amit Shah provides that foil where he's the more belligerent face of Hindutva policy, whereas Modi becomes the statesman. He becomes, as I think you were saying a few days ago, the apolitical authority, and he wants to sort of rise above all these issues and be the face of India in a global scenario. And Indira Gandhi did not have that. She never had anybody, for better or worse, who could actually provide a foil to her leadership during the Congress.
So Modi did participate in the debate, right? Which and interesting is exactly like you mentioned, his is a purely technical addition to the debate, and all the sound and fury is brought in by Amit Shah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you're right, but I think Modi has been able to do that very effectively since 2014, even without Amit Shah, right? He allows the fringe elements to do their job, and if you notice the criticism afforded to the entire secular card criticism to Modi's prime ministership. And if you compare it with the kind of criticism given to Indira's strong arming and Indira's emergency in strong moves, it's very different because Modi does not directly become accountable for many fringe elements that are at play. Like the whole BHP, Hindu, Parivar, Sangh Parivar combined that does everything that, like the lynchings and everything that is wrong with secularism in India, has never been attributed directly to Modi. So you quickly realize that either he's the front or he's definitely de-linked from it, but he is not in the thick of the affairs when it comes to Hindutva, and he's been able to use that very effectively to tailor make his own stitch up his own image of a statesman. But more important, like more noticeably, he said this in an interview himself, right? That he's an apolitical prime minister, and that's of course because Amit Shah does the politics for him. Someone's got to keep doing the politics. But another comparison there is that Indira Gandhi didn't do politics at all, right? There was a period of time where she literally had no connect to whether. So in 1977, when she decided she's going to lift the emergency, she literally had no way of knowing whether she's going to win or not. And she just assumed that the socialist plus nationalist vibe which she had created and the nationalism card which she had played was somehow going to bring her back her benefits, right? Compare that to the booth to booth feedback policy which Amit Shah follows. Of course, it's not it's not universally successful, but it's so polarly opposed, and it goes right back to the roots which we began with. Indira Gandhi comes from top down, Modi begins from bottom up.
Yes. I think that's correct, and I think also to understand that Indira Gandhi was fairly confident that she would be voted back or remain in power rather in 77 when she called for the election. So it came quite as a shock to her that obviously she was voted out. And I think, again, this goes back to the point of having two very different political setups in which both these systems operate, the BJP as well as the Congress. But as we sort of neared the conclusion of this discussion, one thing I want to now raise is the question of legacy. Because if you look at Indian prime ministers, I think there have been, Modi's the 16th, I believe, 15th or 16th. Yes. 16th, yeah. 16th, yes. I mean, we now know what Indira's legacy is. In many ways, she's seen as the great dictator of India. But she also has a more benevolent side that the people try to portray. She's seen as this connoisseur of art, as kind of a stateswoman kind of a figure, as somebody who still represents in some ways.
It doesn't help India much.
No, I know it doesn't. But what I'm saying is, for posterity, it's still an impression that holds in large sectors, right? I mean, and Indira Gandhi is not seen as just a dictator, is what I'm trying to say. She has a lot of cultural capital, as it were, that still paves the way for a lot of the Congress people. And in many ways, the fact that strong leadership existed at one point in time is sometimes seen as a redemptive feature of the Congress legacy. And especially this was evident when Priyanka started campaigning towards the latter part of the 2019 elections, and people were talking about how she has this physical resemblance with Indira, so there might be some political capital to cash in on, because clearly there is a section of the population that still believes that Indira Gandhi holds that sway. So what I want to get at is, what do you think will be the legacy of Modi? In many ways, it's an empty question because, of course, we can't peek into the future.
It's still being formed.
Yes, it's still being formed, but I think as pure speculation, and because we sort of do these contemplative, futuristic discussions, do you think that Narendra Modi would be seen as somebody who became the divider in chief, as the Time magazine portrayed him on the cover?
Definitely. I think that's absolute misnomer. I thoroughly disagree with the Time magazine. I do not support the Hindutva card. I think their interpretation of even Hinduism is terrible. But I don't support divider-in-chief tag for Narendra Modi.
So how do you think
But
he'll be remembered?
yeah, so just two things, right? Which you should which comes to mind on that. First is Modi does not have a pan-India presence, right? Even though he's come across as just the strong Indian leader, the one who united the political brass and like took up the majority in the Lok Sabha. You notice he does not have a presence in the south.
Yes.
He is failing in some places in the Hindi heartland, places like Punjab, right? Whereas Indira Gandhi didn't do that. Second, Indira Gandhi won her votes purely on policy or on mass appeal, or like in a very simple way, right? Like her political Machiavellianism wasn't as high as Modi's. For example, just look at Lingayats, right? The way they got the Lingayats vote in Karnataka is crazy. I mean, so the Lingayats literally have no documented population, but everyone knows they form a large block of the electorate in Karnataka. And successive Congress BJP governments have made sure that no one knows how many Lingayats are there because they keep their own secret reserves of data and they use them for electoral benefit. And they put in when Congress was giving pro Lingayat policies, these guys put in a Lingayat chief ministerial candidate, and this is just representative of what they do across India. That's one, right? The way they do their politics is very different. They're probably going to go down more for their, as you said, their corporate work and this kind of like Machiavellianism than for out and out populist politics, right? Because they have many prongs at which they function. The second is that he doesn't have a pan-India presence. And that can severely impact, if not his immediate political future, then at least his legacy. Because there is some kind of unanimity when we talk about Indira, even if it's about the dark times or if it's about the good times, right? That degree of unanimity is going to lack. If you look at just COVID-19, right? In Kerala, the narrative is not as national as it is, say, in a Bengal or Delhi, where Modi's policies are making a difference, because their government there is pretty much in favor with the policies they're implementing. So he's going to have a far more fractured legacy unless, of course, things change in the coming times. Oh yes, and very important prong is that the religion card isn't attached as much to Indira, right? And even though Modi as a person is distanced from it, I'm sure his prime ministership, at least for these 2 terms till now, is not going to be divorced from the religion card, because it's been on play, right? Like Ghar Wapsi and all has been playing around all over India. So you can't divorce it from the times of Modi.
Yes. I think absolutely pertinent points over there. But what is also interesting to remember about Modi is that he sees himself as a man of destiny. He sees himself as somebody who was meant to be prime minister, even if people did not want him to be prime minister or did not think he would be. And there's this very interesting anecdote that Rajdeep Sardesai shares in his book called How Modi Won India 2019, where he says that there was a panel discussion on, I think it was Channel News Network 18 or something, that Sardesai was anchor back then. And it was an English discussion, and they had Modi. And at that time, Modi wasn't even chief minister. It was before that. And of course, they needed to speak in English. So Modi was supposed to speak on the show, but then moments before the show, Sardesai got in touch with Pramod Mahajan, who is a much more eloquent speaker in English. And so they replaced Modi with Mahajan. But Sardesai did not tell Modi that he was replaced because he couldn't speak good English. So right after the show ended, Modi called up Sardesai and he told him, "आप मुझे इसलिए नहीं लिए क्योंकि मेरी इंग्लिश खराब है ना, देखना मैं एक दिन बहुत बड़े प्लेटफॉर्म में एक बहुत अच्छी इंग्लिश स्पीच दूंगा." Now you look at, yes, exactly, Madison Square Garden doesn't get bigger than that, right? Even for that matter,
his address to the parliament, his address to the House of Representatives and Senate combined.
Yes, and also what he did in Australia, what he did in London at the Wembley Stadium. So yeah, this is a man that cares a lot about his impression. This is a man that believes that there's a certain metric of destiny with which he judges himself. Right. It's also very interesting to know that Modi actually had a portrait of Jawaharlal Nehru in his office when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. So there are many who believe that he has this sort of love-hate relationship with Nehru, a sort of parasocial dynamic where he tries to become greater than Nehru in the mass imagination. But yes, I think, as you said, Modi's legacies will be far more fractured, irrespective of how long he continues as prime minister. But I also think he is at this unique juncture of history, a unique juncture of Indian history, given the apathetic lack of opposition, at least at the central level, he can rewrite a large chunk of his history depending on how he handles himself in what remains of this term, and potentially if he runs for a third term in 2024. Because public memory is very short, right? People very easily forget, and at least to some extent forgive, as a collective consciousness. So I think if he can steer India towards a model where it becomes this new rising force, I mean, it was always supposed to be this new rising force in the 21st
Uh,
century. But if he gives it this foundation, especially after
impetus.
COVID 19,
Yeah.
because a lot of countries have been backtracked as a result of COVID 19, especially you look at the European countries like UK and France have suffered an awful lot. So there's a vacuum in the geopolitical scenario that Modi can capitalize. And I think it a lot depends on whether he decides to go for this ideological push in terms of
Uh,
making India more
uh,
right wing or more driven along the lines of
uh,
Hindutva nationalism,
uh,
or whether he decides that, what, I have got my mandate in place, my Hindu vote
uh,
is in place.
uh,
Now I will turn to a more international framework where I start concentrating on India's economic and its political growth rather than just the security of the vote bank with respect to Hindu nationalism.
I think he's done that already. I think he's shown time and again that he is a master of switching between politics and administration. And just take COVID 19, right? When he made the MSME thing, the liberals are up in arms, and like the common public is going crazy over how 20,000 crores was all credit. People like those in my firm are damn happy, right? They are like they got listed as a medium sector. They fell into the raised ceiling bracket, and that's common across the Hindi heartland. He's no fool, right? He's done it for a reason. It brings in it reins in so much of the otherwise disenfranchised Hindi heartland businessmen, which is literally his core vote bank. It brings in so many of the religious leaders and the people in marts and so many like people on ground zero who want a small move to see that their Modi ji is in place, right? It's very simple for him. I think he's mastered the political craft to a level where he is going to focus on administration. And he's shown time and again that he's willing to take decisions that somewhere also hits his core vote bank. Because demonetization, if anything, hit his core vote bank the most. Like the corrupt or just unscrupulous businessmen. So he's going to implement whatever is politically, socially more relevant or beneficial for India. But he's going to make sure that before election year, he comes up with an accidental prime minister and a Vivek Oberoi playing him on screen, and he turns the tide around again. So that ambivalence of who he is as a politician or a statesman is going to keep happening. And not out and out a Modi support. There have been policies and
Mm.
moves which I thoroughly am not in support of. But I
Mm.
still think like you repose like one can repose faith in things to come. I even think his COVID-19 handling is not good enough. I don't think CA handling was good enough. But
Mm.
yeah, I really think that his ability to switch, and especially the geopolitical front.
All right, then I think as we wrap up,
Uh,
perhaps, I
uh,
mean, the final observation that I would like to make with respect to Indira and Modi, since it's been a
uh,
kind of binary
yeah,
between them, is
yeah,
that Indira Gandhi was much more than just a prime minister. She was
uh,
a daughter, she was a wife, she was a mother, she was this connoisseur of art, she was somebody who saw herself as a stateswoman, as somebody who has a personal space outside the political spectrum. With
uh,
Narendra Modi, the feeling I get is that he's a 24/7 politician. He does not see himself in any other role apart from that of India's prime
uh,
minister. And perhaps
uh,
that will be the enduring difference when we assess both their legacies, whenever it is that
yeah,
Modi is done and
uh,
dusted in the Indian political scenario. The fact that
yeah,
somebody was so obsessed with
yeah.
being the leader that he
Uh,
made everything about his life about that prime ministership. I mean,
I'll
it's
tell you
kind of
why he does that.
yes, yes, yes.
Because compare it with Vajpayee. Vajpayee was a poet, an artist, and the things he did and the literary side to him was somewhere also a very dominating side of his personality,
Hmm.
which kind of cost him the image he needed. So I think one of his more iron head moves was Kargil, and
Hmm.
that too when he was a caretaker government. So contrast that with when he lost, he was tilting towards the poetry and the anti-Pakistan, but still poetry, and the literary side, which did go down as well with the vote base of the BJP, which literally looks for a very strong man at the helm.
Yeah.
So So there's a reason, right? And if you notice, he's been sobering up his image. His positioning, like just from a marketing point of view, is really great. As in, he's just the image change and the soberness which is coming in. Just look at a rally from 2013 December when he won his candidacy, and look at a rally today, or just look at the man today. And there is a soberness that he's brought into himself. Of course, not that you can call him sober, but only in relative terms. And I think he's got to gradually tilt towards that, and towards somewhere towards the twilight of whatever is his ultimate term. He's going to bring in that literary side to him, because he's very well aware of how he has to build a legacy. That's something we can be sure he's going to do, whether he wins or loses in times to come. But right now he's focusing on what he promised to an electorate. Right? Not that I want to sound as if I defend Modi, but yeah, it seems like part of a game plan we can predict from what we know about Modi. It's so easy to extrapolate. He's going to leave a legacy, and he's going to come to building a legacy when the time comes. Like literally, he began campaigning during the 2019 voting.
Yes.
Like his campaign was, or he started very late, and it went on right when you were going to press the ballot button. So his creation of a legacy, the conscious moves to create a legacy, are perhaps going to come very late. And not like Obama, right, who started giving his funny speeches in 2009.
I think it's also unfair to compare with the American presidential system where you
Yeah,
just have two terms anyway.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think as we wrap up, the one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing in the Indian political scenario is whether Modi's supreme confidence, his bravado, his image as this one-man show, whether it leads into the kind of hubris that we saw with Indira Gandhi. And if it does lead into a kind of hubris that we saw with Indira Gandhi, what is going to be Modi's nemesis, as the emergency was Indira's nemesis? Because when you look at great personalities across history, it is this complex dynamic between hubris and nemesis that ultimately determines legacy. So I think we'll have to wait and watch if and when there is a nemesis to contrast, to tackle Modi's hubris.
I think for every Indira, you need a Jayaprakash Narayan.
Yes.
So there is no Jayaprakash Narayan in the political landscape for Modi. And I think he's also effectively making sure that isn't going to be one.
Yes.
So yeah, I agree.
And that is an open question as to whether that is healthy for Indian democracy or not. We'll find out, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. Chalo.
Yo, bye.
Bye.
Hi guys, thank you for listening to this episode of That's What We Said. I'm sure a lot of you will have a lot of disagreements and differences with what we spoke about regarding both Indira Gandhi and Narendra Modi. So please make yourselves heard on the comment section. If you want to raise some other points, talk about some other Indian Prime Minister who you think has certain similarities or differences that are stark with Ms. Gandhi or Mr. Modi, please also do mention that. Click on the bell icon to subscribe to our podcasts. We'll be back soon. Take care.